Dr. Lugo.
Thank you. So, good evening, Mr. President, members of the Governing Board and Cabinet. I am very pleased to be here in front of you this evening to share with you 2 years' worth of work on our standard evaluation system and pending the approval this evening. And I want to let you know that first I'll be sharing with you some general recommendations and history timeline, and then we'll be discussing the teacher evaluation. I will leave some time for questions on the teacher evaluation and discussion for the board, as they're two separate agenda items with the teacher and the principal evaluation system. So as a reminder, Arizona Revised Statute 15203 calls for the governing board and school districts to create an evaluation system where 33 to 50% of the system is based on student achievement data. And it also calls for making sure that we have performance categories for highly effective, developing, and ineffective. And those guidelines need to be incorporated in our system. So just as a reminder of the timeline, when we started this process, the governing board began in November of 2010 and established an advisory committee. And that advisory committee, we researched best practices. We looked at different tools that were being developed and listened to. I went to state meetings and came back and reported to the committee. Then we also had Dr. Ilse Lasko-Kerr, who happens to be in the in the audience this evening, so now I'm having panic attacks if I can pronounce her name correctly. She gave 8 recommendations to the committee, and we revised our instrument at that time, brought it back to the committee. In September of 2012, the governing board elected to have a resolution for an alternative timeline to be implemented. That allowed us by law to pilot the tool this year and delay implementation for next year, which I think was a very wise choice, because we've received lots of feedback, and based on that feedback, we are in the process. We have made some significant revisions, and we're in the process of continuing to make some more revisions. And then tonight we're here looking for approval for our instrument. We've had the attorney review our instrument and give us feedback on certain sections. I took her recommendations, and we didn't have quite enough time to hold another committee meeting, but we did a meeting via email, which is kind of nice, and let everybody weigh in on the changes that were recommended, and everybody agreed they can either live with it, with the changes. And then we are continually seeking feedback from the sites and from the schools, and the training is underway. You've seen this slide before, but I didn't want to cut it because every one of the people on these next 2 slides are so important to the process and have all contributed their knowledge, their expertise, and their feelings for this evaluation system. You can see it's a good balance of teachers, administrators, different grade levels, and so I can't say enough about how this work would not have been possible without the members of the committee. So this purpose was set forth by the governing board at the time in 2010, and our task was to create a fair and equitable model that really focused on accelerating student achievement. So some of the goal statements, and you have seen these before, but I didn't want to lose that, is really to focus on student learning and the learning of the adults in the system. It's all about professional development and using data to help people grow, and using that to improve our educational system. one of the foundations of the system that you'll see in front of you is looking at having multiple measures of student achievement. We didn't want to base our evaluation tool and the student achievement component just on one measure of data, that we were looking at the whole picture. And again, to look at the types of support needed to assist our struggling teachers. So I'm going to talk briefly about the teacher tool, and you do have a copy, is my understanding that Hilda gave that to you in front of you, should you have any questions. So this is kind of a framework of what the teacher tool looks like. We say we have process tools and product tools. Our process tools is based on the observational data that's collected, and that is 55% of the tools. Our product tools are 45%. Now with the process tools, we have scheduled 2 formal evaluations, and they need to be 60 days apart of a full uninterrupted lesson. Then we also have multiple informal observations that are collected and put all that together is part of the process observation document.
Dr. Lugo,
yeah.
on the technicalities, these the time between evaluations.
Mm-hmm.
So like, what if is it like a minimum of 60 days? What happens if like you have it scheduled 61 days out and then like the teacher's sick or something? Like, what happens if it's delayed? Is that okay?
My understanding, and I think the attorneys are still speaking as well, that it has to be a minimum of 60 days apart.
Okay.
So the way our system was built in the past was first semester, second semester, and it seems like that's still kind of the trend, but it's really looking at using both of those observations as the part of the evaluation. No longer is it one observation is your evaluation. Mm-hmm. It's all the data that's collected together, the 2 formal observations, the multiple informal observations, and the student achievement data will make up your complete evaluation.
Okay, so let me just focus on these 2 pieces though.
Uh-huh.
Is there discussion, is there a part of this where you're looking at growth between the first observation and the second? Like improved practices based on the first evaluation, is that part of it, or is it just 2 snapshots spread out across time?
The intent is to look for growth, and that's why having that period of time in between. We also have part of our tool is a professional development plan for all teachers. Mm-hmm. So it's in addition to if a teacher is put on a performance improvement plan, which would come at the end of the evaluation. But if there are areas that a struggling teacher needs to work and grow on, can already be put on, have a professional development plan in place with their principal, and here are some resources to help you grow until you have your next observation. But we're also using that plan for the teacher who is showing they have all the competencies in the classroom, and what kind of stretch goals are they going to put in? What could they do to help their team, perhaps facilitating some professional development opportunities?
Thank you.
Other questions? No. Okay. So we have the 2 formals and the multiple informals. Then 10% of the product side of the 45% will be based on the site goals, which are aligned to the principal goals. And then 35% will be based on the individual student data. Now this is where we break up our teachers into group A teachers, we call them the awesome teachers, and group B teachers, the brilliant teachers, because we don't want them to think that there's any graduated levels. But A teachers, and I'll move to the next slide, this kind of looks at the whole pie. They have multiple data points which we can use for the evaluation system for the product side of that, and we consider those valid and reliable. So you'll see we use the AIMS, the ISTEEP, the Azella quarterly benchmark assessments. And there has been some conversation from teachers based on feedback on surveys of why aren't we using pre-post data? And so we're exploring, I think it's on December 10th, ATI will be coming out and sharing some of their resources with us. And so if we make any major changes, or any changes, we'll have to bring that in front of the governing board.
Dr. Lugo, on that question, is there like an indication from teachers that they feel more confident with the pre-post, or is it just like, why is that not here? And I imagine because we want to emphasize the growth, maybe they see that more clearly than with these other tests.
I think they can all show growth, but it's much more clear if you have the same type of questions in the beginning and the end, where the quarterly benchmark assessments are assessing each quarter's essential performance objectives that were taught that quarter. And so showing growth from first quarter to third quarter, there's still growth that occurs because students are learning to read, they're learning comprehension skills, yet it's not as clear as it would be with a pre-post assessment.
Okay.
Makes sense?
Yeah, well, so this maybe bleeds into Group B, but like those pre-post assessments, couldn't we create that for art?
They're in the process. Our art teachers, our PE teachers, our music teachers, they have all collaborated together last year to come up with some benchmark type of assessments for them to use in their student achievement plan. As well as speaking with ATI, they have 90 other districts, and they are working on pre-post assessments. And I attended some meetings with Makisa, and they are also working on some of those assessments.
And so this affinity for ATI, is that because it gives us more like valid, reliable measures, or why don't we just do our own? I imagine this costs money to work with RTI.
With the ATI system, because we use ATI Galileo currently, the tools that they have are free of charge.
Okay, I like that. Thank you.
Dr. Lugo, I have something off on a tangent. With the testing and all that, like you're using the AIMS, we get like AIMS scores way after school recesses for the summer. Mm-hmm. When will the teachers be presented with their evaluations then? And so
that's an excellent question. The data that we will be using for the AIMS, the product data piece, that will be based on last year's data. Therefore, our new teachers to the system will automatically, even if they're a 5th grade teacher, will automatically be in a Group B on a student achievement plan because we won't have last year's data to rely on.
Right, but when in the school year, like what month, what quarter, will these evaluations be presented to the teachers?
Okay. Let's see, how do I explain this? They will be able to verify their data on AIMS once the AIMS data comes out. So it's usually around October. So they'll be able to verify that data. Their evaluation, the summative of the product and the process, will be at the end of the school year.
So is that like the superintendent's evaluation, where we look at previous achievement with current process, and then it just rolls over every single year? Is that a similarity?
Yes, exactly.
At the Arizona, the AD kind of, they're the ones who pushed for this. Has anyone approached them, whereas psychologically positive feedback or corrective immediate does a lot better than something 6 months down the road?
There was talk about moving up timelines and having that information sooner than later. I've heard of those. But right now, the best that we can do, and I think is the best apartment we can build, we can live in while we're building the house in which we want to live, or that we can rent. So that's what I'm,
Thank you.
I mean, I think this isn't the only feedback our teachers get. This is the formal evaluation, but with the CT4S and other opportunities, they're getting constant feedback. Is that correct?
they're getting CT4S in the form of coaching from their administrators and the coaches on their site. They have multiple informal observations where the principal comes in, sees what's going on, gives them written feedback. Oftentimes that's also in a conference, plus 2 formal observations. And then there's multiple opportunities for teachers to look at their data and see how they're doing along the way. They meet on a weekly basis to look at their common formative assessments, which are not part of their evaluation. It's used to inform their instruction, but they'll know how they're doing as they go along.
So like, I know the system is new, but if our principals are doing a great job leading, there really shouldn't be a surprise at the end when they get their formal evaluation, like this is what it looks like. They should already know based on many conversations, am I correct?
Yes, except for the Ames piece. But they because we have the predictors with the benchmark assessments that become pretty good predictors on how the Ames will come out. Okay. Okay, and so the performance categories that we have right now, and one of the requisites that needs to come out is the governing board needs to adopt the definitions for the performance categories. My understanding is that the Arizona Department of Education is still working on the exact definitions. These were the ones that were available, and they're in the back of your evaluation tool that were available in September. There's still conversations regarding developing and a little bit of talk on if they're going to add another level of partially effective. But you'll see here highly effective is that the teacher is able to demonstrate professional standards, which are the observation piece, as well as their students make great gains for highly effective.
Where did these definitions come from if AD is still working on the definition?
The State Board of Education had some preliminary definitions in September of 2012, and so this was, I have the ones that are in here that were pulled off of there.
Okay, thank you.
And Dr. Lugo, I know we're talking about teachers and then we'll talk about principals. Where do our SATs fit into this?
Okay, so all of our teachers on assignment, they are Group B teachers because they don't have classroom data. So they come up with a student achievement plan for the students whom they work with. So our teachers on assignment use the plan as more of a general plan for the teachers that they work with and how the students are doing. Yeah, it's complex.
I'm just thinking about the SAT and the responsibility for all those kids, which is right, but crazy and immense.
Yeah, it's complex.
On these performance categories, I know this is a question that we've had in the past, so if there are 4, and if these are the 4 categories, and it makes sense to me that someone new to our district or someone who goes to teach a different unit or discipline could fall into this developing. But it doesn't make sense to me that you have an effective teacher and then that person's developing later if they're not performing at the same level. So how does that reconcile if a teacher was effective and then they're no longer effective?
Yeah. I think that's where you need to we as a system really need to look at the supports to help that teacher come back to effective. I think, there's this career cycles or things change in the system, and that we need to make sure that we have the supports available. If somebody moves from being effective to developing, what are the factors there that have caused that? Or is that person have some personal life changes that they're no longer focusing on their classroom as they need to?
So the administrative team looks at this first as what are we doing, first and foremost, to support this teacher?
I think that would, how would I put that? I would say, I would look at it as what can we do
Okay.
to support the teacher, to support the students in the classroom.
Okay.
Any other questions?
This is our break for discussion on the teachers.
I think, first of all, I want to thank everyone who was involved in the committee. I think this is a thorny issue, and it's something that involves a lot of data, which isn't everyone's forte. But I think that this will, it sounds like this will be a little bit of work in progress, certainly the analogy of what best apartment we can rent while we're building our house kind of thing. It may take refining over the years, but I'm glad to see that we at least have this start. So thank you all.
I just want to say I've been interested in this topic before it was the law, and I'm pleased to see it developed. I know we're always looking to refine it, and I feel we have the talent here, but I do have some information from Denver. The Denver Public Schools is pretty proud of their system, which I'll be happy to share with you later. Is there a motion?
I move the governing board approve the standard evaluation system, SES, for teachers as presented for use in the 2013-14 school year, and move that the governing board designate that teacher evaluation shall be comprised as follows: 55% process observational data, 35% individual classroom data, and 10% site data.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Dr. Lugo, will you talk to us please about the system for principals?
I would be happy to. So the system for principals, it very much mirrors the system for teachers in percentage-wise, and that was very important to the committee. So you'll see that 45% is based on student achievement data. That is the site data. That's the 10% of the teacher's data. And 55% is based on the process data, which are your standards around your leadership standards and functional duties, as well as site goal attainment, which we have moved towards a rubric-based on that aligns with the ISLIC standards, which are put out by the state. We have the site goal attainment, which really aligns to the WestEd rubric and the CT4S, and what the work is being done with RTI, the response to intervention, both on the academic and behavioral piece. The 45% on the student achievement data, our system before was in compliance with where the state was asking us to go with the percentages of student achievement data. Most of it is based on AIMS, performance classification, Zella, and then there's a small portion that's based on a parent survey of the school effectiveness survey.
Question on that. So Dr. Lugo, I remember attending a workshop with you on tripod evaluations, looking at surveys of students, and then maybe this is more for the other conversation, but I saw the parents here. Like, have we changed anything in terms of our parent survey based on that research? Have we looked into that any further? And I ask only because I was in Memphis and they were very excited, they meaning a couple teachers, so I don't know about all of Memphis, but a couple teachers very excited that they had tripod in their evaluations, and they really valued parent input and children, like students' input, and teachers felt really confident with that, and I didn't see that in here, and I know we had attended that workshop.
Yeah. No, there have not been changes in the use of the survey data. We still use the school effectiveness survey.
Okay.
Okay. And so the performance classifications have also been aligned for the principal tool. These definitions are not in stone at this time. I haven't seen any different definitions for principals as for teachers, but the competencies, basically they need to be competent in their leadership standards as well as producing the student assessment data. So it's pretty much the same there. Any questions?
Question. One of the concerns with adopting these types of evaluations that I had read about and heard about was this fear that teachers won't want to teach in certain schools because they might fear that it's a tougher assignment and their evaluation and student achievement would negatively affect them. Has that question been approached here, and how do our teachers and principals feel about that?
At this time, I haven't heard that direct question about not wanting to teach at a specific school based on their student achievement data or their demographics. What I have heard was worried about teaching a certain population, such as special education students, or worried about teaching the ELD classrooms. And one of the strengths of this tool is that it really focuses on growth and meeting kids where they're at and seeing what the teacher can do with that group of students and show that growth. So, but I haven't heard, because it's a failing school, we don't have any failing schools. Goodness. But I have not heard that. And the retention committee right now is grappling, or very beginnings of grappling with the incentives piece for that will be in the law coming up for, well, it's in the law now, but to be implemented in 2013, 14, and 14, 15 about making sure that we have incentives to have teachers move from highly performing schools to assist those schools that would be struggling, and protection for those teachers and principals to move that way.
Great. Question? Dr. Lugo, would you please share with the committee, I think, well, at least for me, the board can say if they also agree, very enthusiastically appreciative of the work and thought that's gone into this over the last several years. I know it hasn't been easy, and I appreciate your leadership on this.
Thank you. I will pass that on to the committee. Thank you very much.
Motion?
I move the governing board approve the standard evaluation system for principals as presented for use in the 2013-2014 school year, and move that the board designate the principal evaluation shall be comprised as follows: 55% process leadership data, 45% individual site data.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. Our next item for discussion is under business and plan, adoption of the revised maintenance and operation, unrestricted capital and soft capital budgets. Mr. Walmer.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. When we adopt our budget in June, it's based on forecasts because we don't know how much we spent the year before, etc. Our annual financial report gets tied up in October, and in December we're required to amend our budget to include actual figures from the year before. So there's always a few changes to be made, and that's what we're doing here tonight. These changes are technical and not philosophical or anything like that. So this first slide is just a reconciliation from the adopted to where we are now. Student counts get reconciled up to June 30th, just like everything else does, and so as that was finalized, we picked up the number of ADM. Our override, you may recall, is this is the final year, but it's calculated as though we still had full-day kindergarten, so we count kindergartners as a whole student or a full-time student, because when the voters approved that override, that's how we did it. So to maintain that integrity, we're allowed to do that, and there was a little difference between my calculation and ADE's calculation, and that's reflected here. 2011-12 expenditures from forecast to actual, and a small adjustment to our career ladder carry forward figure. And so there's that bottom figure is the M&O budget you're being asked to adopt tonight. The consequences, really, I'm going to broaden the information here a little bit, and the consequences of the M&O budgets of the last few years of what's happened as we have reduced our margins there have become a little bit more slim. When departments are asked to reduce their budgets, the first thing they do is look at money they didn't spend anyway the prior year and give that up, and so that doesn't always reduce expenditures as you might hope. It reduces carry forward, I guess. And so now in year 4 or 5 of that, we have to be more accurate. Some of the reductions don't generate the savings that we hope, and so that's where we are now. On the positive side, our student count has begun to increase, and that really is the main news. All of our reductions we made over the years, the vast majority of that has been due to declining enrollment, at least on the M&O side, as opposed to changes in the state law, apart from the fact that we didn't get funded for the 2% or inflation that we were supposed to get over the last 3 years. Classroom site funds, as I mentioned in the presentation before, those revenues have begun to increase, and that will help with teacher compensation in future years. The first figure that goes on to next year's budget that always comes out, typically comes out this time of year, that the ASRS contribution rates have been published, and that's going to cost us about $90,000 additional dollars in M&O. Our insurance costs increase typically, on average over the last several years is about 10% per year, and that's over a $3 million transaction. I believe it's our biggest transaction actually with the vendor that we have after payroll. And if you chart out 10% increases on a figure like that, it doesn't take long before it dominates your whole budget. So we're going to go out to bid for insurance services for next year, even though we are in year 2 of 5 of a deal that we had in place with that, and just to take a look and see if there are options. Utilities, always, we never quite know, but that's about $1.5 million, and when those rates go up, that impacts us greatly too, and we don't have any developments there yet for sure. This is a reminder about where we are in our override situation, and I quickly and firstly need to note that arrow points to the wrong year. I'm sorry about that. I noticed that a few minutes ago, but so you are not there, but you're a line above in 12-13. And so we're in year 2 of that override, and again, I show this a lot just so we can all keep straight and not forget where we're at, because we do have to strategize in advance of how we want to handle the situation as we approach the expiration or the phase out of that override. It's good to keep that in mind. Capital allocations, which as you know have dropped over the past several years. We actually had a slight increase this year, and there has been some legislative support, at least buzzing around on emails, for giving us some of that money back. We'll have to see, but this is typically the last act of balancing the state budget. They wait until their books are closed and see what the figure is left that needs to be saved, and so we get a reduction of the capital allocation typically at the very last minute. So that's an allocation of just over $1 million, and this is a summary of what we typically do. And as you recall from prior presentations, we do have some carry forward dollars that we have been using to support our capital programs in addition to what we bring in. Curriculum materials, those are consumable workbooks we buy each year. A textbook adoption for one subject district-wide typically costs between $800,000 and $1.2 million, so that exceeds our single entire capital allocation for a year these days, at least as it stands now. Technology, we spend some money to replace obsolete equipment. Computers burn out, etc., become obsolete. Our software renewals, and that's educational and non-educational, the software we use to conduct payroll as well as intervention materials, $600,000. We have a copier lease, $65,000. We put out money to the schools to help them replace aging and ruined textbooks and those kind of things, things that support the curriculum. We do all of our building renewal with bond policies, so if we did not have those bond dollars, I'm not sure how that would fit onto this slide. There would be some tough decisions. Furniture and equipment, that's mostly tools, vacuum cleaners, etc., that we use district-wide that also has a shelf life. School buses, we did buy a school bus this year, or that's in our capital budget.
So Scott, on that other
Yes.
slide, so like I know in the past we went out for a capital override, it didn't pass. So without like trying to invite a controversial debate on charter schools, I'm wondering how charters fund these things, because they actually have no, they can't go to voters for capital override.
Right.
What do they do when they run out of money? Like, is there something we can do that they do to supplement capital expenses?
They get, their allocation is not separated. They get so much per kid, and if they spend it on capital, that's fine. If they don't spend it on capital, that's fine. So I'm not sure how they operate. Yeah, I don't know. They haven't been around as long typically, so they probably don't have the carry forward balances, so it's probably a challenge.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if there's something that some other areas we haven't looked to try and supplement or add to our capital budget, but I don't know. I'll ask.
My observation is that they tend to be not have the facilities that we do, that they are renting, they don't own the facilities, and some of them are in strip malls and don't have playgrounds. So
Thank you.
So the economy is improving. What I'm hearing from the legislature that has not formally met yet is there is support to bring back some capital dollars. The debt ceiling figure, I saw that on an email from Diane Smith this week, that is on the list of things we're going to talk about again. This would be year 3 for that. The first year it was passed, but it had some faulty language. Last year it never came up. And
is this having to do with, for example, our district and the other districts that have a bonding capacity that's been limited by our...
That have bonds that they have authority to sell, but they can't because their secondary assessed valuation has fallen to a point where the debt ceiling formula won't allow it. Yeah, there's a lot of districts in that situation. State level of debt, the buildings that we sold and leased back, that's a competing use of funds. And also we get 2 equalization payments in the following year, so we're paid in arrears for our equalization money. So that's several millions of dollars that they have pushed into following reporting periods. So at some point they'll have to make that back up as well. So that's just a competing thing that they have to look at. District debt limits, what we just discussed about the bond issuances. Capital reductions, I also mentioned in that that's a last minute reduction that they give us to balance the state's books. And so to bring that back doesn't really require action on their part. It just requires them to not reduce it. So legislatively, possibly that's easier for them to do than to bring back funding that has been canceled permanently. and student enrollment. So, I mean, that is something to celebrate, that we have 100 additional students this year, and possibly our future's a little brighter in that area. The budget itself is in your background materials. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Thank you. Our next,
We have a motion.
we do.
Yes.
Great.
Move the governing board adopt the revised number 1, 2012-2013 budget for adjustments required by the Arizona Department of Education and budget balance carry forward and career ladder budget carry forward in accordance with state statute.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. Now we can move on to the legislative political report.
Didn't Scott just give it? Yeah, I've been seeing the same thing that he has, that in the Capital Times, that there seems to be some bipartisan consensus that with the failure of Proposition 204, that there is a need to identify some sort of revenue for schools, especially given that certain things like we just saw curriculum. Adopting one single curriculum district-wide would eat up our entire capital expenses. And I know when we went into the Great Recession, that was one of the things that was said, well, you can put off buying curriculum a couple of years, you can put off desks, computers, but those are things that you can't just say this is our new permanent funding level, especially as we move toward having to take the park assessment, which requires a computer to take, and there are schools that don't. I don't think we have that capacity right now to all take the park assessment at one time. So I unfortunately think that there are a lot of folks in the legislature who are looking at this as one-time funding, and because there is a surplus right now for our state, we intend to have there's a carry forward balance. As Scott mentioned, there are all these other debts that we have to pay off as a state at some point. But revenues have come in ahead of expectations this year. That, in addition to that, means we also have revenues coming in ahead of our spending this year. So there will be a carry forward balance. And I think it was last year that there was a deposit made to the state's rainy day fund to help get us through future years. So there's not a lot of will in the legislature for increased permanent spending or restoring cuts, but I think there is definitely some support for taking some of that possibly rainy day money, some of that extra money, and using it for one-time things, which might mean one-time money for capital that they could then not give us in future years.
Have you been following the Arizona Ready Council and their discussions on a new funding formula? I've only heard about it. I don't know anything about it, so.
I don't. I know that this seems to be a perennial issue that goes back to probably when I was a student or before. That, and this was one of the issues with people raised against Prop 204 is that it doesn't do anything, or it actually makes it harder for us to revise our funding formulas going forward. And this is one of those things that's talked about every single year or two, and I've never seen any big structural reform in this, so I don't know anything about this current effort, so I can't really comment. But and then I did have one other thing. There is a committee. I think it's an interim committee which the legislature sets up to meet while they are not in session to discuss a certain issue. And there is a tax credit review committee that will review a lot of the dollar-for-dollar tax credits that our state has. So that includes our extracurricular activities fund. It includes the various student tuition organization funds. So those are tax credits that you can choose to give that money to an organization, and then you get to reduce your tax amount by the exact same amount, which means that instead of money going to the general fund, it goes to a student tuition organization or a district for extracurricular activities, which takes the money out of the state's general fund, about half of which I think goes for education, or maybe specifically K-12 education. So I know that there's a lot of support within various communities who benefit from those tax credits, but there is a report that I had Dr. Boyle kill a couple trees and put in their packet. The part about the tax credits, specifically the private school tuition and the public school extracurricular activities. And I just wanted to highlight a couple items in case you don't read it all. The student tuition organizations, which are the private school tax credits, since they were introduced, well, since a couple of years after they were introduced, since fiscal year 2000, we've seen a 1.1% growth in private school enrollment and a 25% growth in public school enrollment. So if these credits were, they're not really numbered, but it is about the fifth, oh yeah, it is, page 20. Which is actually the fifth page of the document, but because it really starts off on page 16. The first page is not labeled. So basically, if the idea was to help students who wouldn't otherwise be able to go to private schools, go to private schools, that doesn't seem to have happened because there has not been a growth. In fact, public school growth is far outpacing private school growth, so this tax credit is not leading kids to leave our schools. On the other hand, it is costing us money, so I think it raises a public policy issue in my mind anyway, of some of these families presumably may need this to attend a private school, but many of them clearly would be attending a private school whether they receive this tax credit or not. And I think some of the proponents of the tax credit have said, well, it actually saves the state money because we might, for a $3,000 tax credit, be able to get a kid out of the public school system, which frees up, $6,000 worth of state money that can be reinvested elsewhere. And I don't know that that's worked. So if you look on page, well, this one is not labeled, but it's after page 21, so I guess that's 22. It has a summary of the individual and the corporate taxes, so you can see exactly how much these donations generate. The public school extracurricular tax credit, although it's the smallest amount that any individual or married couple can donate, only $200 or $400 per married couple, because so many people donate it, 250,000 Arizonans claim it, it's responsible for $48.4 million. The student tuition organization, the private school one, there is one that far fewer people donate, but they donate more money, generates almost the same amount, $43 million. And then if you look down, of these 5 tax credits listed, only one of them is required to go to low-income students. You can see what the average scholarship amount is. And that's actually the smaller one. It generates only $11.1 million compared to the one that's $43 million that can go to people regardless of their income. And then what I think might be interesting to a lot of you is that the last few pages show the extracurricular fund and what public school districts get funding and how much they get. So in our district, most of the people, from my understanding, a lot of the people who donate to this are parents and their families of children in those districts. And in our district, many of our parents, if they may not have $400 worth of tax liability to go against, or if they do, they may not have the financial ability to give $400 to the district in December and then get it back in the spring on their taxes. And I think that shows up when you look at, for example, on page 28, number 11, Catalina Foothills Unified District, which is the foothills outside of Tucson. Only 8.8% of their students are free and reduced lunch eligible, about 1/10 as many as our students. Yet they receive contributions averaging $216 per student. We average $22 per student. So they have 1/10 as many students who are low income, and they get 10 times as much money per student from this tax credit. And you can see that goes pretty well. Scottsdale gets $102 per student, Kyrene $117, Fountain Hills $183. We get $22 per student. And the legislature, I think, has now allowed districts to use that extracurricular tax credit for instructional aids, textbooks, library resources, things that we would normally fund out of other sources, and state funds. So in my opinion, if they're moving from having so maybe we have actually had a reform of our funding formula, that we're moving toward one where parents can choose what schools they want to donate to. But unfortunately, not every parent can choose to do that. And so that certainly inhibits our ability, getting only $22 a student compared to $216 in Catalina Foothills. So that is something that a committee will review and make a recommendation to the legislature. I think the recommendation is actually going to be that the tax credit for public schools extracurricular funds should be indexed for inflation because every year, because some of the private ones for student tuition organizations do go up every year. So, my 2 cents. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Matt. Any other legislative or political reports? Okay, thank you. Our next item is future agenda items. Perfect. Motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion adjourned. Motion approved. Meeting adjourned.